Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast. I'm Christian Harris. Really pleased today to have Ed Corbett on the podcast with me. He works at HSE, where he heads up human performance and organisational factors, but he's here today talking in his personal capacity, so please don't construe anything that he says, any opinions he gives, as being HSE policy. He's a psychologist by trade. He's worked in some high-risk industries over the years, and he's now, as he will tell us, doing a PhD all around leadership and well-being in the workplace. So we have a really fascinating guest and a great conversation. We talk about governance, we talk about board leadership, we talk about persuasion and influencing people to change the way they think and act about safety, and a whole raft of other topics too. I'm sure you'll enjoy this, so let's get into the conversation with myself and Ed Corbett.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Welcome to the podcast, Ed.
Thanks for inviting me, Christian.
Been looking forward to this. First guest who has something quite formal to do with HSE, although you're obviously not speaking on behalf of HSE today, but it's good to have you on anyway.
Brilliant, good to be here. Thank you.
So let's start with thinking about health and safety leadership then. So if we think of things from a sort of board enterprise level, why is getting health and safety leadership right important?
Yeah, I guess, and I'm sure this has been brought up many times in some of the conversations you've had with others, but often when it comes to health and safety performance, a lot of the sort of focus shifts to people doing sort of the sort of dangerous work, the hazard activities, people at the sharp end, the coalface, however we sort of want to refer to those individuals. And often they are kind of dealing with systems and processes and so on that are sort of, in many cases, imposed upon them. And in a lot of cases also a lot of shortcomings with them as well. And in many cases, a lot of the activities and actions that can really make a difference, things like maybe better design, better prevention controls to be put in place, and so on, are inevitably influenced by sort of senior management and the amount of weight they put on health and safety and doing things in the most effective, most preventative type ways. So to me, that's one of the main observations I've had over the years, is that those organisations that tend to perform better have that real commitment at the very top of the organisation, and they put much more effort into it, and those that do less well put less effort into it. They'll often sort of have sort of platitudes around safety being really important, but not necessarily sort of back that up with some of the actions that go along with it.
I remember at one of the recent trade shows, James McPherson, I'm not sure if you've ever come across him, he's got a podcast as well. He did a session with a panel, and one of the questions he was asking is health and safety too full of platitudes?
Yeah, and I would say it probably is. I mean, there are those out there, are organisations and leadership who, make this point that safety is really important, health and safety is really important, and back that up. But there are many that perhaps sort of don't sort of really back that up as well.
So, in your experience, how can you kind of shift that view? So if a board is not aligned with what they're saying and what they're doing, how can you sort of shift their mentality to, or influence them to change their mentality to being more preventative, more proactive?
Yeah, I think that is I guess a question that you probably expect that I guess get asked relatively frequently, and it's always quite a difficult one, because at that kind of level within an organisation, if it's not really a core value to the top level of leadership, then it's really difficult to sort of change those beliefs and then the actions that flow from that as well. So I guess there's sort of highlighting the benefits of getting these things right, but often there may be a little bit more sort of distant benefits, the longer term benefits of getting this right from a sort of performance point of view, from a safety point of view. And with many boards, particularly those in the private sector, there are more pressing matters in a lot of cases. So if you really look at or try to understand what's motivating the actions and behaviours and so on at any point in time, it's often driven by the sort of financial imperatives of meeting sort of the right sort of quarterly reports on the financial side, not necessarily around the safety side as well. So a lot of the behaviours at that level are driven by achieving the right sort of financial sort of targets and goals. So it's not, in a lot of cases, it's not that there's a lack of care about health and safety performance. It's just that the more pressing goal is the financial side of
Yeah.
things, if that makes sense in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I don't see, there's always bad eggs, right?
Mm.
There's always a small, 0.01% or whatever the number is of people who are bad eggs. But I think the vast majority of people are not, and it's a lack of understanding, isn't it? I suppose, as to what they should be doing and why and how they should be doing it, and that could be both at a board level as well as somebody on the shop floor, as it were. Somebody
Yeah,
doesn't deliberately do something wrong which causes someone else or themselves to get hurt. Obviously nobody sets out to do that.
yeah,
But it's how to engage with them, and I find, I guess, two things I would say. One is that I quite like talking about the positive aspects of getting safety right, but I find that it's hard to engage people on that. So the carrot approach is less effective than the stick, which is a shame.
yeah,
But the second thing I'd say, excuse me, is what I strongly believe is that every board can buy into performance being important. So I think
mm,
actually the link we have to draw, or try to draw, is between safety driving performance. Because I think if you can get everybody would want a high performing team,
yeah,
and I think they'd value that because they'd intrinsically understand and believe that a high performing team is going to drive those financial results.
yeah.
So it's drawing the link between safety and performance, I guess. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I would very much agree with that, and I think yeah, influencing the sort of bad eggs, as you put it, is probably going to be a difficult ask to achieve. But certainly those who, the majority who are genuinely interested in improving, I think one of the approaches that could have quite a big impact is more of a sort of coaching type style with either individuals or collectively at boards as well. To sort of maybe highlight some of the inconsistencies in messaging, because again, I think where some of the challenges arise is that some of the right things are said, but then other actions, other comments kind of contradict or undermine some of the big messaging around safety as well. So I think in some ways having a coach or a number of coaches who can give that feedback in the right kind of setting where it's more of a one-to-one, less threatening type environment, and saying, you've got this sort of slogan around safety being a number one priority, but then at the sort of meeting that you had with the whole organisation or team members yesterday, you did say these things, and that kind of conflicts with that messaging. Can you kind of see that? And providing that kind of feedback, I think, can be quite beneficial to maybe creating that greater awareness of where the contradictions are arising that they may not really be aware are taking place.
Mm. I think there's something around incentivization as well, isn't there? Particularly in these bigger companies where, your CEO, CFO are typically remunerated based on quite short-term performance and share price and things like that. Whereas this is more of a longer-term kind of play, isn't it? I was interviewed on a
Yeah,
podcast about from an employee benefits specialist, and we were talking about health and safety and how employment packages are put together, and she sort of researched it among her client base, and it was all about the lagging indicators of um, number of accidents and riddles and things like that, rather than the kind of input side of things.
yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's an element there around the sort of day-to-day goals that are set, and they're often short term. They're often maybe not sort of focused on the right things. There's also, when it comes to selection and recruitment of whether they be sort of middle managers or very senior sort of level executives, you never. I used to be more involved in that kind of level of recruitment, and you never really hear questions pitched around health and safety in the right kind of way, and people's sort of mental health at work as well. So
Mm.
the focus in those kind of interviews for selection is very much around, like you say, the sort of financial performance, getting the most out of the business in those kind of terms. And I always wonder how what the reaction would be if a potential candidate sort of came forward and said, actually, our financial performance was kind of okay, but the sort of mental health of the team was fantastic. People were really well looked after. We were really proactive in looking after people's health and safety. Yeah, financial performance could have been a bit better for sure. How would that kind of land? Would that be sort of seen as a real positive, or would the sort of focus on the financial be sort of take precedent and the most important element of that as well? So I think maybe there's a shift there in how we look at recruiting those kind of executives and where we put the focus on competencies and actual performance of past experiences as well.
I think it's easier for a privately held company to take the longer term view, isn't it? And so if that conversation were being had with me, and my business is pretty small, so it's kind of we're not on that scale yet, but as a privately held business where I'm in it for the long haul, and as are the shareholders,
Yeah,
actually you'd be thinking to yourself, if you had that report, well, that's a really positive report, because I just know in my bones that means next year,
yeah,
because we've got all these positive things going on, we are going to see that financial performance sort of
yeah,
skyrocketing. Whereas again, if you're in a big PLC,
yeah.
you're sort of perhaps being judged unfairly, and so perhaps there's a challenge there around how we can make this resonate with different sizes of company, maybe.
Definitely. And I think, trying to sort of get to the core of where an individual's coming from a leadership point of view is probably quite important. And you're right, those sort of maybe some of those smaller organizations that maybe the financial pressures aren't too great on them will be sort of very considerate of the future and the longer term, not just sort of the next quarter. And I think from a leadership point of view as well, when we look at with senior executive CEOs, trying to understand where they're coming from is quite important. Are they on a sort of stepping stone to other opportunities? Is their position in this organization, is it short term? Is it something between 1 to 5 years? And then are they going to be looking for the next sort of step on the sort of career ladder for themselves? Because to me, that's quite important as to how long term their buy-in to achieving these things are in the long term. If their view is, I'm going to be here for sort of 3-4 years and I'm going to be moving on to the next thing, the level of commitment and investment to the longer term elements of investing in health, safety, mental health, and so on, it's just not going to be the same as if it's sort of your company and you're wanting it to be that sort of longer term success, or all your values just align to that kind of view of longer term success as well.
Yeah, it's always important to ask the question, what's in it for them? Any stakeholder that you're trying to influence to make a decision or improve something or change something, what's in it for them on a personal level as well as on a business level? Because actually we typically act emotionally, or this is my view. I'd be interested, because you're a psychologist, you know this better than me. We typically act emotionally and then rationalize things logically after the event.
Yeah, that's very true. So yeah, we do tend to do that. So we like to think, I think maybe some of the sort of self-help books and those kind of things have really sort of popularized the sort of perspective of being able to sort of separate out thinking rationally and from thinking emotionally, but ultimately all our sort of thoughts and decisions have a level of influence from the sort of emotional side and irrational side. And yeah, you're right, we sort of post hoc rationalize some of those things to make us, I guess, feel better that we've made the right call and that we were rational and logical about those decisions. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we've kind of identified that there's potentially scope for improving leadership at a senior level. From a governance perspective, because I know this is a topic you're really interested in and doing a lot of work on. How do you go about, or how would you recommend people going about measuring sort of competency and delivery of this kind of this health and safety leadership in a board?
Yeah, so from a corporate governance point of view, the sort of structures and practices that the organisation has in place to sort of help manage the business and the organisation are going to be quite important. And how we integrate into that the health and safety is quite an important one. So do we have within the board directly the sort of competence and understanding of risk and risk management practices? Do we have, or do we assign the bulk of that to a health and safety director, for example? Are we able to act as a sort of intelligent customer around what competence we need, what our risk profile is, or where should we be investing our our strategies for improving safety, what the key priorities that we should be managing more effectively. So I guess there's lots of elements there about making sure that, first of all, we have the awareness of how our structure and practices contribute to health and safety performance, where the gaps are and where we maybe need to plug some of those gaps as well.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting. It's quite a big puzzle, isn't it, to try and solve?
Yeah, and I guess it's having that. It's one of those sort of throwaway phrases, isn't it, that I think is used quite a lot these days as well, about having that sort of humility to sort of recognize your failings, either as an individual or as an organization as well. I think it's quite a big ask sometimes for very senior members who are kind of in some ways expected to have all the answers, to say, actually, we don't know everything. We have got some gaps here. We do need to plug that by maybe bringing in whether it be an executive director or a non-executive director who can maybe give us a bit more sort of scope to, or direct us on what we should be doing here, where our gaps are, and those kind of elements. So yeah, to sort of put our hands up and say we don't actually fully know what we're doing here is quite a big one. And I have worked with organisations where some of the senior executives have said, we are struggling with this. We don't really know what the right things to do are. In some cases, they've kind of, after some conversations, they've recognized that some of the practices around health and safety that they're doing aren't really focused on the important things in their risk profile. So they're doing things, a lot of organizations will focus heavily on things like rules. There's lots of things. I'm not going to sort of criticize sort of holding the handrail, but if that's all you're doing on health and safety, you're sort of reinforcing that everyone should hold the handrail when you're maybe extracting hydrocarbons, then yeah, don't discourage people from holding the handrail, but maybe let's get the stuff around the risk in relation to extracting hydrocarbons right as well. The competence of people doing that and those sorts of factors.
Yeah, it does take a certain level of sort of self-awareness, doesn't it, to be open to not criticism, but open to sort of taking third-party advice to improve. I mean, what I've found in my business, for example, is that sort of if you say to somebody, you ring them up or you meet them and you say, do you have a problem with people slipping and tripping and falling over? They're always going to say no, because the barriers go up, because if you're running something, if you've put policies and procedures in place, and if you've designed your business at a board level in a certain way, you're proud of that. It's your work. It's kind of part of you is in it, and therefore to criticize, taking criticism is quite difficult. So what I found works better in having these types of conversations is to sort of go down the route of nobody's perfect, right? Can we go, you're clearly doing a good job or a very good job, but can we just go that extra incremental improvement to go from good to great? And that does seem to resonate more with people. And if you've had experiences of that kind of approach.
Yeah, definitely. I guess also making what might seem quite a big problem into something that's maybe not quite as big an issue. I mean, I don't want to sort of cross too much into the realms of your expertise here as well, but this, in relation to things like slips and trips, there's some quite simple, cost-effective things that can be done there as well around. Definitely, I mean, maybe things like flooring are perhaps in some cases a bit more expensive, but things like footwear as well, not necessarily a biggie. Sometimes it's cheaper to sort of give people the right sort of, or safer sort of footwear with better soles on them and that kind of thing than it is that they're currently being provided with as well. So I think highlighting some of those issues you mentioned, highlighting that actually some of the solutions are actually quite simple, cost effective, is really important.
And thinking about step by step, again, whatever goal you're looking to achieve, forgetting slips, trips and falls, if you perceive a goal as being sort of the top of a mountain, that seems like a long way to go. Whereas actually, if you can put a ladder in place where actually you're just taking one small rung at a time, again, you can find it's a bit easier to bring people along with you.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think there's not to disagree there, but I think there's sometimes a bit of a balance as well. So I certainly agree on some elements of managing risk. There's definitely a need to make sure you're doing that sort of incrementally and one step at a time. What I would encourage organisations to do as well, though, is to sometimes think about what is the most effective way of getting to in your words, the top of the mountain as well. Because sometimes I think we can unnecessarily break things down into increments to get there. So actually, in some cases, it's more cost effective and better from a health and safety performance point of view to sort of try to get straight to the top in sort of one fell swoop as well. So yeah, I think it's recognizing, is this something we can achieve or should be achieving incrementally, or should actually we be targeting straight for the top as well. And I guess kind of linked into that. So in the past, I've done bits of work around safety culture, and inevitably questions come up about safety culture maturity and ladders and all that kind of stuff come to the surface. And I think one of the challenges a lot of organisations have when they're trying to improve on culture is that they often don't fix some of the problems which you might associate at the bottom of the ladder as well. So wherever they sort of end up ranking on these kind of ladders and scales, they then sort of strive to go up to the next level or to the top, but they often don't fix the problems that are recognised at the bottom, and then they kind of wonder why they're never sort of improving. And often it's because they're not fixing the foundations, the sort of issues right at the very bottom.
I love being disagreed with, by the way. So I don't
I
like
wasn't
it when
to disagree. It wasn't to fully
No.
disagree.
No, I know.
Partial disagree.
Is there something around sort of thinking from a sort of psychology perspective as well about who your audience is? So I guess some people think using a sweeping generalization. If you've got someone like an investment banker who's like, I'm going to be the best in the world, I'm going to make so much money, and I'm going to do this and that, they'd probably be more aligned to sort of jumping to the top of that mountain in one fell swoop. Whereas perhaps somebody who's an accountant, let's say, might be more, their personality type might be more aligned to doing the sort of incremental steps.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I've not come across that so much in a sort of from the sort of developing safety from the sort of angle of looking at it through a sort of culture maturity lens. But certainly see that having the sort of right conversations is important, and pitching things at different levels. So if sort of to go back to the sort of board level, if you're looking at, you might have a chair, CEO, someone sort of in charge of the financial side, chief financial officer, human resources. What's quite interesting is sometimes some of the roles as part of that board don't quite see why they're involved in health and safety. So I've certainly had on a number of occasions chief financial officers say, no, I've got no idea why I'm involved in this stuff around health and safety. And when you sort of highlight, well, you're sort of controlling the purse strings as to what we're investing in from a sort of safety point of view, then that's quite a key factor that you're here. HR similarly, often when financial pressures are felt, things like training get cut. So investment in people's competencies, whether that be technical competencies or other sort of safety related competencies, non-technical competencies and so on, they often get slashed quite quickly as well. So actually through conversation and kind of pitching it to the context of people's jobs, I think is quite an important one. So so we're making sure that people appreciate they all contribute to health and safety at board level, but maybe in slightly different ways. So I think persuasiveness and understanding those different perspectives that people are coming from is quite important, definitely.
And we shouldn't forget as well, the FD is probably going to be a director of the company, and therefore they have legal obligations around safety as well, right?
Yeah, most definitely. So if there are sort of if there is an incident or issues like that, then there could be some responsibilities and accountabilities at that sort of level, definitely.
Yeah. When you've kind of worked on these types of themes with organisations in the past, what sort of results have you seen in terms of translating that down to outcomes on the sort of shop floor level? So people out and about doing the work. What kind of sort of tangible or intangible outcomes have you seen from this kind of work?
Yeah, I think unfortunately a lot of it has been more sort of, I guess, anecdotal. I'd say this is probably an area that really does lack that research around building that sort of evidence base around certain interventions at that kind of level in organisations, and sort of following that through to how it actually relates to safety performance. And perhaps one of the big issues there is we're still grappling to some extent with how we actually measure safety. So many organisations are still very much focused on incidents and accidents and near misses as measures, and a lot of debate around, well, should there be much more focus on some of the leading indicators? So measuring interventions against those lagging outcomes is quite a messy picture to try to use to evaluate interventions as well. So there's probably a little bit of a lot of groundwork there to really understand what are we trying to measure, and how valid is it to actually understanding actual safety performance as well. But anecdotally, some of those organisations, sort of board members who start to really sort of change their thinking around managing safety, and simple things like just engaging with the broader workforce more, getting out to the shop floor as well. So sometimes there can be quite a heavy reliance on information, particularly in large organizations. Sort of they can be very hierarchical, and you're quite reliant on information flowing upwards through chains of management. And often when you do that, you can often end up with a sort of positive spin being put on as well. So there's some kind of jokes out there around how the information distorts. So you might have a bad news story at the sort of on the sort of shop floor, and then each layer it travels up within the organisation, it becomes much more positive until you get to the very top, and the news is fantastic. You know, there's not a problem at all. It's actually really good news. So sometimes it can be really helpful as well at the very top of an organisation, if it's very hierarchical, just to get back to the shop floor and have conversations with people, demonstrate that you're sort of very open and interested, and just hear firsthand as to what people's experiences are, what their challenges are, and get that sense of, is there more we could be doing from a leadership point of view to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to support either better controls or to support people in learning better from incidents and reporting and all these kind of things. And getting back to the shop floor I would say is a really beneficial way of cutting out that distortion that can cascade upwards in an organisation.
Yeah, and it's asking the right questions, or asking them in the most effective way as well, isn't it? I mean, I know I've spoken to heads of safety before who turn up to a board meeting and they get asked, you know, health and safety's number one on the agenda, and the question they get asked is, are we safe, or something like that, or have we it's very closed question anyway, with a yes no answer, and obviously it's never as simple as that, as it's always more nuanced.
No, that's it. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, from my days sort of working in oil and gas, yeah, it always seemed a bit of an uncomfortable moment. You know, does anyone have a safety moment, or with it being the first on the agenda? And sometimes you would get some, I guess, creativity to people just trying to come up with something to sort of fill that slot in the agenda. So I think, yeah, again, when we get into the realms of those kind of platitudes, I think it does sort of lose its value. I mean, if there is, I think it's good to have that opportunity to raise something of genuine interest, of concern, something to share. But when it's kind of forced, then it loses its value. And in some ways, I think not only does it lose its value, but it can kind of undermine safety as well, health and safety as well, because people just feel it is becoming a bit of a sort of tick box. A little bit like sometimes with when we have safety walkabouts as well. Some of the questions that get asked there, the lack of sort of follow-up to close out some of the concerns that are raised, really give people at the shop floor that feeling that, yeah, this is just a sort of tick box exercise. And in some cases it is. Sometimes it's because directors may be given a sort of quota of the amount of safety walkabouts they've got to do in their performance appraisal, so they get out sort of 5 times to have a bit of a chat, but they're not necessarily actioning stuff that comes out of those conversations.
Yeah, which is, yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, what does HSE do in this arena? So, you know, I would have thought that there must be a case for a HSE-led or HSE-endorsed kind of research project to try to answer some of these questions, and perhaps that's something that is going on. But is there anything like that you're aware of that's being done?
Yeah, well, from a sort of personal point of view, I guess the sort of wider picture, I'm not sure about other bits of research. From a personal point of view, the sort of corporate governance and leadership angle is something, yeah, very much of personal interest. And it's an area I'm researching. So I'm currently undertaking a PhD at the University of Manchester as well.
Yeah.
So that's that level of interest in board level and corporate governance is certainly something that I am involved in some research through the PhD route, and also other bits of research being done in HSE as well. So yeah, it's certainly on the agenda.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's something that could be sort of grown, certainly an area of interest.
Yeah, it just strikes me that we should be doing something as an industry and as the people that are kind of trying to shape the discussion and so on around, you know, the value of safety, or you know, and some kind of good solid research to answer some of these questions and try to give some tangible results and case studies to kind of prove this point. Because I think, as you say, if we had the evidence, then it was kind of irrefutable evidence, you know, it's worked in this sector and that sector, and you know, then that would make those kinds of conversations a lot easier, wouldn't they?
Yeah, it would. And I think a lot of the research at the moment tends to focus on things like leadership styles. So there is quite a wealth of literature out there around different styles of leadership. So, people have probably heard around things like transformational leadership and so on and so forth, lots of different sort of styles. But when it comes to other aspects of things like competence around understanding risk management, when it comes to sort of, I guess, motivation, so what we were talking about earlier as to, do you have a long-term investment in the business and its long-term success, or are you here as a sort of stepping stone for the next leadership management executive type role? So when it gets into those kind of realms, I think there's much less literature and much less research on those aspects. So yeah, lots on styles, leadership styles, less so on competence and motivations.
Yeah. Okay. Talk to us a bit about the PhD.
Yeah, sure. So that's very much focused on the well-being topic, so less so on the sort of higher hazard aspects of health and safety that we've been talking about. So very much on the sort of well-being, mental health, work-related stress side, and we'll be looking to engage with senior executives, again, board level executives, to try to understand how they contribute both individually and collectively as boards to achieve success when it comes to improving employee well-being. And I think that perhaps ties in again to another area that's less well researched, which is when we think of leaders, we often think in very individualistic terms, that you've got a leader, a manager, a CEO, but actually, what is the importance of them working collectively together? Are they a group of individuals doing their own things, or do they actually collaborate and work together in a way that contributes to performance as well? So and health and safety. So that's something very much of interest as part of that PhD work as well, is to understand that focus on either individual or collective leadership.
I interviewed Jeff Trickey on the podcast a few months ago, and he's interested in psychology, and he's developed this tool called the Risk Type Compass, which basically is like a survey with, I don't know, 80 questions or something like that, and it plots you on this kind of compass versus a risk profile. And then he's done a lot of work in different industries around kind of makeups of boards and how you should have, the complementary risk types and so on and so forth. So that might be something worth having a look over. I can do you an introduction to Jeff if you like as well.
That would be really useful. Yeah, because I mean there is a bit of research out there that covers topics like diversity of boards as well. So I think there is some evidence there to suggest that diversity of boards is quite important for the performance of how effectively they work as a board. So it does sound like it. I mean, I don't know the tool yet, but it does sound like it perhaps picks up on some of those points, that it is important to have that sort of diversity within a board as well. And there are other linked aspects there that are quite key as well. So is there a sort of culture whereby the group is open to being challenged as well? So perhaps cultural aspects that might overcome some of the things that we know hold us back on health and safety performance, that level, things like groupthink and so on. So yeah, those that diversity, that sort of openness to challenging each other, really, really important.
And in terms of the sort of well-being agenda, what's your perception on the trend that's moving in terms of importance relatively, now versus, let's say, before the pandemic and 10 years before that, and then how do you see that developing 10 years from now?
Yeah, I think it is becoming more important to many organizations. I mean, the numbers have changed quite significantly over the years. So on the as HC, the data's collected from the labour force survey around work-related stress, and I think over the last sort of 20 years, the numbers reported from that have gone from something like a couple of 100,000 to I think the last sort of reporting year was about 800,000. And I guess what's difficult to sort of fully understand from that is that purely because the numbers have gone up, or is it because of other factors coming into play? Like, is there less sort of stigma around it? Do people understand it better? Yeah, are people more open? Do they realise more that they are? It's it's not just a difficult job and you just got to get on with it, but they recognise it more as maybe a less acceptable part of working life as well. So there's probably a lot of factors that come in, and it's difficult to unpick whether it's purely the numbers have gone up or some of those other factors coming into play as well. But I think, a lot of organisations are taking it much more seriously. There is still quite a focus, I think, on some of the sort of initiatives. So at the moment, it does feel like there's very much more focus on things like just general well-being promotion, like encouraging people to do more exercise, eat healthily, and those kind of things. And that's all good and that's all fine, and also very important. But when it comes down to better management of some of the really big factors that might be causing people stress, so maybe unachievable workloads and these kind of things, I'm not sure whether we're yet sort of focusing enough on making sure we're really investing in those kind of preventative measures that will impact at that kind of level. So it's more I guess focused on general well-being, being healthy and so on, less so for organisations on the preventative side. So I think that's where I'd like to see the shift in the coming years, is organisations to really grasp that actually we can do much more by being more preventative around issues that are causing people stress and maybe exacerbating existing mental ill health issues or causing mental ill health issues through the work that they're doing.
Yeah, I was chatting to someone who listens to the podcast, so he'll identify himself here, but I won't say who he is. But he's got a team. He's a safety and risk leader. He's got a team, and works in a big business. And when prior to the pandemic, his team were always out and about, crisscrossing the country, visiting sites and so on and so forth. And then when the pandemic hit, they moved to being mostly home based, and they still continue to be mostly home based. But he said it's kind of good in the sense of, if you look at it superficially, that's extra time and less stress around traveling and commuting and so on. But actually, the reality is that we're filling most of that time with doing more work and sitting on the laptop. So actually, we're not necessarily getting that positive well-being benefit that people might expect.
I think you're right. There's some of the research I know of now, the University of Manchester as well, has sort of picked up on this point around what they also sort of branded techno stress, as to we're always kind of tuned in and latched into to the work. So how many of us have our work phone sort of plugged in, charging it next to us in bed? You probably might check it before you go to bed, check it first thing in the morning. So, and same with laptops and so on. We're kind of tuned in maybe much more than we used to be as well. So I mean, there is some sort of conversation around being able to sort of detach more from work as well. I think it's perhaps in France where they've actually brought into law sort of rights to disconnect as well, and sort of sticking to a set of working hours where that communication between work and the worker has to sort of take place in those certain hours. I'm not sort of fully familiar with it, but I think that's the sort of pathway they've gone down. Whether that's sort of best, I'm not sure. I mean, again, coming back to the sort of some of the points around the benefits of it, there's the flexibility. So, depending on what your sort of life is, your patterns of work are, it might be preferable to work maybe early in the morning and later at night, and whatever you've got to do in the middle of the day doing other things. Also, I think that flexibility has been very good for a lot of people. So I don't know whether it's to sort of say, right, work has got to be done in this particular set of hours. That perhaps reduces some of that flexibility. So it's a really sort of interesting topic area that probably needs a lot more discussion and debate as well, and research.
The I mean, I've got the benefit of being the in charge of the business, right? But the flexibility for me has been necessary and couldn't have lived without it really over the last couple of years, because I basically do exactly what you just said. I wake up early and start the day early, and then I finish currently at 3. Pick up my kids from school, and then I typically log on and do a bit of work in the evening. So I'm working hard because I'm still working when I'm picking up my kids and looking after them and getting dinner ready and stuff. But it's a different type of thing. But for me, that balance is what I've needed to do, and I've sort of shaped everything that I do in the business around that family life sort of requirement, which is great. And I think having that flexibility is beneficial to so many people. I was listening to an interview on the Today programme with, I can't remember her name, but she's quite senior in one of the trade unions, and she was saying, she had times where, I think she was a single mum, or is a single mum. Her kids are older now, but she had times where she felt as if her employer should have just been grateful that she'd even made it into work, because she'd gotten up at 5 and had a disaster here and a calamity there and ridden the bus and done this, that, and the other thing, and then you turn up for work and it's there's a lot of extra stresses and strains that are placed on people as well, aren't there?
Definitely. Yeah, so I think that whole debate around the flexibility side of things, and also maybe appreciating people's different circumstances, I think there can sometimes perhaps be an assumption that everybody, work is and career progress is really important to everybody. Some people do, just want to have a job and have that flexibility in the job. For others, it's a core part of their life and who they are, and they're really keen on career progression. In some organisations, there can be that perception that everybody should be sort of tuned into, being really committed to their job and their career and wanting to progress and develop all of the time. And that's not the case for everybody. Some people do just want to have a job that they can sort of, they don't have ambitions to progress in their careers. They want to sort of be able to come to work, do their sort of 7.5, 8 hours of work, and then be able to disconnect and go and do other things. So I think appreciating some of those differences that people have as well are really important.
Yeah. And just to pick up on the final point around prevention around mental health, I was listening to Tony Blair recently talking on a podcast about sort of how he would see the NHS moving to being more preventative, and I noticed Keir Starmer's picked up on some of this as well. And it strikes me that that is a very sensible way to go, and clearly we know in safety it kind of works. But it feels to me as if we're, as a society, perhaps a little bit too reactive than preventative. So again, that might be a bit of a shift, but I guess that's something that you see the value of in all facets of life, whether it's physical health, safety, mental health, trying to shift to being more proactive and preventative.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's I guess you can sort of parallel it to your health, can't you? Not your health personally, Christian, but for people's health, that prevention is better than cure. So if you can prevent an issue from arising, it's going to be much more beneficial from the harm, whether that's sort of physical, whether it's mental, and also then the costs for helping people recover and so on and so forth as well. So yeah, it's prevention is much more effective on a number of levels. So yeah, definitely more investment on the prevention side, whether it be traditional safety or the mental health stress side as well. Absolutely essential. Definitely.
Yeah, good stuff. Great. Well, look, thank you so much, Ed. I really enjoyed that conversation. Before we go, I didn't know if you wanted to just let people know where, if they wanted to contact you, would be a good place to do that, and also whether there's any plugs or sort of research papers or anything like that in this field that you'd like to sort of highlight, and we can mention them now and include them in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. I guess the main place, if people want to get in touch, probably one of the easiest is just to sort of on LinkedIn. If people want to sort of connect on LinkedIn and ask any sort of follow-on questions or chat about anything there, then that would be absolutely fine. Yeah, I guess that covers it. We're doing a lot more, or we're getting involved in a lot more research again at the moment as well. So there's perhaps maybe some more sort of comments to make in the future about some of the research that we're getting involved in as well from the HSE point of view as well. I can pick up on that down the line, definitely.
Yeah, well, open invitation anytime you've got anything else that you've published or want to kind of come on and discuss, then be very happy to give you the platform to do so. So yeah, no, that'd be brilliant. That'd be good. All right, well, thank you very much, and thanks for joining Ed and I in this conversation as well. Do reach out to him on LinkedIn, and we'll see you again next week for another episode of the podcast.
Well, thanks, Christian.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.